The flowers were beautiful. That's what I kept telling myself, standing in the corner of the Fairmont ballroom, with a glass of sparkling water. I hadn't touched in 40 minutes. The flowers were beautiful. The venue was gorgeous. The string quartet was playing something I should have recognized, and I was the only person in a room of 200 people who had come alone. My cousin's wedding. I'd flown from Edmonton to Vancouver specifically for this, took 3 days off work, bought a new dress in a shade of burgundy the sales associate called confident. I felt anything but. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Owen and I had been together for 4 years. We had talked about this wedding, actually. How we'd dance badly on purpose to make people laugh. How he'd steal extra desserts from the table because he loved anything with salted caramel. We'd talked about a lot of things. And then, 6 weeks ago, he'd sat across from me at the kitchen table, with his hands folded like he was about to present a business case, and he explained, in very measured language, that he didn't think we wanted the same things anymore. I hadn't argued. That was the part I kept turning over. I hadn't argued at all, so here I was. 200 people celebrating love, and I was performing a very convincing impression of someone who was fine. My cousin, the bride, found me between the appetizer course and the first toast. She was radiant in a way that didn't even seem real. Her cheeks flushed pink, hair pinned up with small white flowers woven through. She grabbed both my hands and squeezed them. "You came," she said, like she hadn't been sure I would. "Of course I came," I said. She gave me a look that was equal parts worry and apology. She knew about Owen. She knew everything. "You okay?" "I'm great," I said. "Your flowers are beautiful." She laughed, a little uncertain, and then someone called her name and she was swept back into the celebration, and I was alone again. I drifted toward the terrace. The hotel overlooked the water, and the November air outside was cold enough that I knew no one else would follow me out. That was precisely why I went. I leaned against the railing and looked out at the dark stretch of Burrard Inlet, the lights of North Vancouver, blurring in the distance, the mountains somewhere behind them, invisible in the dark. I gave myself 2 minutes to feel sorry for myself. I'd read somewhere that was a healthy thing to do. Acknowledge the feeling, give it a time limit, move on. I counted to 120 in my head. I was on 94 when I heard the door open behind me. "You're hiding." I turned. A man stood in the doorway. One hand still on the door handle, tie loosened, jacket still on. He was looking at me with the kind of directness that made me want to check if I had something on my face. "I'm getting air," I said. "In November. In a dress with no sleeves. I run warm." He stepped out onto the terrace and let the door fall closed behind him. He was taller than I'd registered from across the room, and I had registered him. I admitted that to myself now, somewhere between the dinner rolls and the salad course, when he'd laughed at something the man beside him said, and the whole table had turned toward him, like he was a source of heat. "I know who you are," he said. "You're the bride's cousin. From Edmonton. How do you know that?" "She mentioned you might be here alone." He said it without any particular weight, like it was just a fact. "She was worried about you." I felt my jaw tighten. Of course she was. "I'm fine. You've been standing in that corner for an hour. I like corners." Something shifted in his expression. Not amusement, exactly. More like recognition. "Fair enough," he said. He moved to the railing beside me, a respectful distance, not crowding, and looked out at the water. We stood there for a moment without speaking. The sound from inside was muffled now, the music a low pulse through the glass. "How do you know the couple?" I asked, because the silence was starting to feel like something I might fall into. "Groom's older brother," he said. "Xavier. I thought about that." "You don't seem like Xavier." "No one's ever accused me of seeming like Xavier," he agreed. "My parents had different plans for me." "What plans?" "Quieter ones." He glanced sideways at me. "I went into commercial real estate development instead. My mother has never fully recovered." That surprised a laugh out of me, short and genuine and completely unplanned. He caught it like it was something worth catching. "There," he said. "That's better." I shook my head. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make a project of the sad woman in the corner." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm not. I came out here because the speeches are going long, and my brother will talk for 45 minutes if no one stops him. And I needed air. Same as you." I believed him. I wasn't sure why, but I did. His name was Miles. Miles Calloway. The kind of name that sounded like it belonged to someone who wore well-made shoes and kept their word, and in the hour that followed I discovered both of those things to be true. His shoes were very good, and he had apparently promised his brother he would stay for the entire reception, even though the flight back to Toronto the next morning was early enough to be genuinely offensive. We talked on the terrace until we couldn't feel our fingers. Then he held the door open and said, "Come back inside. I'll stay with you if you want, so it doesn't feel like you're alone. Or I'll go sit somewhere else, if you'd prefer. Either is fine." I stood there for a second, genuinely surprised by the clarity of it. The choice, offered plainly. No pressure hidden inside the offer. "You can stay," I said. And he did. We found 2 chairs at a small table near the edge of the dance floor that neither of us was using. He got us coffee, mine with oat milk, he'd actually asked, and we watched the room together. He pointed out the groomsman who had spilled champagne on his shirt and was slowly rotating throughout the night to hide the stain. I noticed the flower girl who had fallen asleep in a chair, with her basket still looped over one arm. He laughed when I pointed her out, quiet and genuine. And I noticed that he laughed with his whole face. At some point, the music shifted into something slower, and couples moved onto the floor, and I felt the familiar ache of it. The kind that lives in the sternum, not the throat. I must have shown something, because he set down his coffee cup and said, "You don't have to tell me anything, but I'm going to ask once, and then I'll drop it. What happened?" I looked at him. His expression was open, unhurried. He wasn't leaning forward with performing concern. He just looked at me, steady, like he had all the time in the world and no agenda inside the question. 4 years, I said. He ended it 6 weeks ago. I thought we were building something. Apparently, we were building different things. He nodded slowly. Did he know what you were building? The question landed differently than I expected. Not why did it fall apart, or are you okay, or you'll find someone better. Just, did he know? I thought so, I said. Then, more honestly, I think I assumed he knew. Miles looked at the dance floor. "That's the part that's hard to sit with," he said. "When the failure of communication is bilateral and you can't locate the moment it went wrong." I stared at him. "Sorry," he said. "I read too much." "No," I said. "No, that's exactly it. That's exactly what it is." He looked at me again, and something in the room felt like it had shifted a degree, like a window cracked open somewhere letting in new air. I want to say the rest of the night was simple after that, but it wasn't quite. It was better than simple. It was easy, in the way that things are easy when you've stopped performing, and the other person never asked you to perform in the first place. He danced exactly as badly as I suspected. Arms slightly too stiff, rhythm technically present, but spiritually absent. And when I laughed at him, he laughed too and didn't try to recover. We danced once, to a song by a Canadian artist his mother apparently loved, and he kept one hand at a careful distance at my waist, and I thought about how long it had been since someone had been careful with me, without making a big thing about the carefulness. Just before 11, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and something crossed his face. "Work?" I asked, unfortunately. He tucked the phone back in his pocket. "Development project in Calgary, tenant dispute. My partner needs me on a call in 20 minutes. He paused. "I'm sorry." I shook my head. "Don't be. This isn't. You didn't owe me your night." He tilted his head slightly, like he was disagreeing but wasn't going to push it. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, and then stopped. He reached into the inner pocket and produced a business card. Physical, cream-colored, the kind that meant he'd thought about it, and set it on the table in front of me. "I'm in Vancouver until 9 tomorrow morning," he said. "If you're staying tonight, there's a cafe a block north of the hotel that opens at 7. Their butter tarts are better than anything in Toronto, and I say that as someone who has fully committed to that rivalry." I looked at the card, then at him. "I don't know if I'll be up at 7. "You don't have to be," he said. "I'm just telling you where I'll be." Then he said good night, found his brother, said something in his ear that made the groom laugh and grip his shoulder, and walked out. I picked up the card. Miles Calloway, Calloway Development Group, Toronto on. A phone number. A small logo I'd have to look up later. I sat there for a while after he left, listening to the music, watching my cousin sway with her husband in the middle of the room. her head on his shoulder, completely in her own world. I set the card in my clutch. The cafe was called Birch and Kettle, and it was exactly a block north of the hotel. He was already there when I arrived at 7:22. Which, yes, I did show up for, despite telling myself 6 separate times while getting dressed that I wouldn't. He had a coffee in front of him and a second cup, still covered, across the table. He looked up when I came in. "You made it," he said. "I was awake anyway," I said, which was entirely true and also entirely beside the point. I sat down. The coffee was oat milk, no sugar. The butter tarts were extraordinary. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. I know because I checked his departure time twice in my head, doing small, anxious math about airport security and boarding gates. About everything and nothing. His development projects. My job at the urban planning office in Edmonton. A documentary we had both apparently watched about the history of Canadian lighthouses. His long-standing disagreement with the entire city of Toronto about what constitutes a proper winter. When it was time for him to leave, we walked out together and stood on the sidewalk in the early morning light. Vancouver quiet around us, the air cold and clean and smelling faintly of salt. "I don't know if I'll be in Edmonton anytime soon," he said. "I don't know if I'll be in Toronto," I said. "I know." He looked at me directly the way he had on the terrace the night before. I wanted to say, whatever that was last night, "Thank you for letting me stay." I laughed despite myself. "You already thanked me. I know. I meant it differently, Ice." I knew what he meant. I wasn't going to make him explain it. We exchanged numbers on the sidewalk, both our phones out, the old-fashioned way of reading numbers aloud and watching each other type. It felt more deliberate than texting a contact, somehow. More honest. He left for the airport. I walked back to the hotel, with my hands in my pockets. That was early November. By mid-December, we had talked every day. Not always long. Sometimes it was a voice message left while one of us was driving. Sometimes it was a photo of something funny and mundane. A sign in a gas station window. The particular quality of light on a Tuesday morning. Sometimes it was a phone call that lasted 3 hours without either of us planning for it to. I was not looking for this. I want to be clear about that. I was actively, deliberately not looking for anything. My therapist and I were doing good work on the Owen thing, and I had made a private commitment to myself that I was going to spend at least a year being just myself. By myself. For myself. Miles was not part of that plan. He also did not feel like a plan being disrupted. He felt like a window being opened. He flew to Edmonton the second weekend of January. I told him it was a terrible idea, because January in Edmonton was a particular kind of cold that had to be experienced to be understood. And he said he'd survived 38 Toronto winters and wasn't worried. He lasted 6 hours before admitting that, yes, this was different. This cold had a personality. And I stood in my kitchen laughing at him while he held his hands over my stove. I cooked dinner. He sat at my kitchen island while I did it, and we talked the whole time. And at some point, I turned around and he was watching me, with an expression I didn't immediately know what to do with. Not hungry. Something quieter than that. Something more patient. "What?" I said. "Nothing," he said. "You make good use of a kitchen. That's a weird compliment. I mean it sincerely." I turned back to the stove. After dinner, we watched the documentary I'd been telling him about. Something about the development of the Trans-Canada, which sounds boring and was actually riveting. And he fell asleep on my couch halfway through, and I sat very still beside him so I wouldn't wake him. And I thought about the fact that I was not afraid, and how strange that was, and how long it had been. He was in Edmonton for 2 days. On the last morning, we drove out to the river valley, walked along the paths, our breath-making clouds in the cold air, and he was quiet in the way he got when he was actually thinking, not just pausing. "I need to say something," he said, when we had come to a stop at an overlook above the valley. I waited. "I've been going slowly on purpose," he said. "I want you to know that. It's not because I'm unsure. It's because I thought you needed the pace." I turned to look at him. He wasn't watching me. He was looking out at the valley. "Did you think I couldn't tell you that?" he said. "I didn't know you'd noticed," I said. I noticed. The trees below us were bare, the river frozen in stretches, and Edmonton spread out beyond that, flat and wide and full of a whole ordinary life I'd been living, and which suddenly felt like it had more in it than I'd realized. The pace is good, I said. I want you to know that too. I'm not holding you at distance because I'm not interested. I know, he said quietly. Like the sentence didn't need to be finished. And that was it. That was the thing. He had a way of knowing that never felt like it was ahead of me, only beside me. Even when I hadn't said the words yet, he made space for them. He never filled in the blanks for me. He just waited, with genuine patience, for me to get to the end of my own sentence. We had our first real fight in February, which I am including here, because I think it's important. And because every version of this story that pretends people don't fight is lying to you. It was about the distance. He had a project expanding in Vancouver, and the Calgary situation was ongoing. And there had been 2 weeks in a row where our calls had been clipped and interrupted, and I had started to feel, and I know how. This sounds like a thing being fit into a schedule rather than a person he was choosing. I told him that, not calmly. I had been holding it for a few days, and it came out with more edge than I intended. Late on a Thursday night, over the phone, both of us tired. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, "You're right. I've been managing my time and fitting you in, and that's not the same as choosing you. I'm sorry." I blinked. I had been braced for defense. I had a whole internal architecture of responses ready, rebuttals to things he might say. He didn't say any of them. "I need you to tell me when that's happening," he said. "I don't always see my own patterns. I need you to tell me, and you'll hear it," I said. "Without making me feel bad for saying it?" "I'll hear it," he said. "You have my word." It is a particular kind of thing, someone giving you their word and meaning it. I've had people give me their word and not mean it, and I can tell the difference now, even if I can't fully articulate why. Something in how the words land. Something in whether they cost anything. That one cost him something. Not a lot, but something. Things shifted after that. Not dramatically, not the way they do in movies, no grand gesture, no airport sprint. He started scheduling differently. He came to Edmonton again in March. I flew to Toronto in April, and he took 2 full days off. Actually off, phone in a drawer, and showed me the city the way he knew it, which was mostly through the lens of what had been torn down and built in its place, which is apparently the occupational hazard of working in development. I liked Toronto more than I expected to. I told him that. "Don't tell anyone," he said. "It'll ruin my Edmonton complaints." We were walking along the waterfront when he stopped and looked at me and said, "I want to say something, and I want you to just let me say it without interrupting." That's ominous. It's not. I'm not good at this kind of thing, so I'm going to say it plainly, and I'm asking you not to make a joke until I'm done. I held up my hands, a gesture of surrender. "I love you," he said. I've known it for a while, and I kept thinking I'd wait for the right moment, but I think I've been using that as an excuse, because this kind of thing scares me too, so I'm just saying it. I love you. That's it. That's what I wanted to say. The lake was enormous behind him. Seagulls doing their particular wheeling thing over the water. Traffic noise from somewhere behind us. Warm April air off the water. The city going on around us, not caring at all. I stood there and felt the sentence arrive. Not like a shock. Not like being knocked sideways. More like when you walk into a room and realize someone has quietly put the heat on and the cold you'd been carrying has nowhere to live anymore. "I love you too," I said. I've been scared to say it first. He laughed. That whole face laugh I had catalogued from the very first night. "Me too." "We're both very brave," I said. "The bravest," he agreed. He was right that he wasn't good at this kind of thing. He was also wrong, because the way he loved was not the smooth, effortless performance of someone who had been practicing. It was careful and deliberate, and a little awkward at the edges, and it was entirely, unmistakably real. Real in the way that costs something. Real in the way that asks you to show up. The distance is still a fact of our life. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. He's in Toronto. I'm in Edmonton, and that's 4 hours by air, and a lot of planning and canceled plans and rescheduled calls, and the particular ache of a Sunday evening when the weekend visit is over and one of you is in an airport again. But I want to tell you something about that ache, because I think it matters. It doesn't feel like loss anymore. It feels like the price of something I chose. There's a difference, and for a long time I didn't understand what the difference was, but I think it's this. Owen leaving felt like something being taken from me. Miles being 4 hours away feels like something I am actively, every day, choosing to hold on to. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. The last thing I'll tell you is this. Last October, almost a full year after my cousin's wedding, she called me to tell me she was pregnant. First baby. Due in the spring. She was crying a little when she told me. Happy crying. The kind where you can't fully talk. And she said, "I've been thinking about you all day. About that night. You looked so sad when I found you. I keep thinking about how different things are now." I thought about the terrace. The cold railing under my hands. Counting to 120 and not quite making it. "I keep thinking about it too," I said. "Do you think you'd go back?" she asked. "If you could change anything." I thought about it honestly, the way she deserved. "No," I said. "I think I needed to be exactly that sad, in exactly that corner, for exactly the right person to find me." She laughed through her tears. "I don't think of myself as someone things happen to anymore. I think of myself as someone who stood on a cold terrace in November, and when the door opened, didn't run back inside. That, I've decided, is enough of a story for one life."